this can't be good. But you're trying to rationalize, like there's a reason, there's some logical explanation why they'd be calling me. So I'm thinking like maybe my parents broke down or something. They're trying to figure out if I'm close and I can come get them. And I said, well, I'm in New York, but I'm on my way to Massachusetts. But, he asked how long before I was there. And I said, I probably won't be there for about 5 hours. I'm going to get in pretty late. And he said, okay, this really can't wait that long. I have to tell you this over the phone. And I'm still like kind of two minds. Like part of me is going like, oh my God, this is bad. Like this is the phone call that everybody dreads. And I'm still trying to think of some rational reason for this. And my sort of last ditch like thought is, I'm like, maybe there's a warrant out for my arrest in Massachusetts. I know I didn't do anything that I can think of, but that's got to be what this is. I have a warrant. I have to
laugh at that because you're describing getting the call so well, Chelsea, like so well, because our mind goes to these really crazy, goes to the worst case scenario, and then also goes to this like weird thing about us. We're like, is this, so this is there something on me? Like, is there something wrong? Like, because you would rather that be true than something really horrific. So what a great way to describe this. So yeah. So he tells you.
Yeah. He says, there's been a terrible accident with your father and your sister on your dad's motorcycle. And I said, are they okay? And he said, no, they didn't make it. And I was just, you're just walking out of work like any normal day. I'm walking down the street. I've walked down 100 times. I'm doing the same things I've done 100 times. And you just get this phone call. Just everything changes in a second. And again, it's been 10 years, but it makes me so emotional to talk about. I remember that phone call like it was yesterday. I remember exactly what he said. I remember, and I just hit the sidewalk. I was just screaming. I can't even say I was sobbing. I was screaming. And I was like, I don't believe this. I don't believe this. I don't believe this. And he immediately was like, please don't drive. Promise me you're not going to drive. I was like, I'm on the street. I don't even have my car with me. Like, oh, of course I'm not going to drive.
Right.
And then he was like, who else needs to know about this? And I said, you mean my mom doesn't know? And he said, no, nobody knows. You're the first person we've been able to get in touch with. We have not been able to find any of your family. Because
how did they get your number, Chelsea? Was it the phone? You were emergency contact? I'm always curious about that. And I know a lot of the listeners are as well.
Yeah, I actually still don't know to this day how they got my number. Yeah, I know that I know that they went in my sister's wallet and they found she had her boyfriend's number that she had broken up with like 6-7 years prior. They called him and they didn't tell him. They were just asking if he had more, information of family. They went to my dad's apartment, but of course nobody was there. I think they asked one of his neighbors.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you feeling lost in your grief journey? Perhaps even stuck? As a surviving sibling, I too have felt lost, stuck, confused, angry. Well, fill in the blank. I've felt so many emotions along my grief journey. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about, too. Along the way, I found that what I needed was answers to all of my unanswered questions, validation, permission to feel everything that I was feeling at different times, and ultimately, I needed guidance. That's why I created the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. This is a 23-page guide that guides you, the surviving sibling, along your grief journey. Written and created by a surviving sibling for surviving siblings. Click the link in the show notes to get your copy or visit thesurvivingsiblings.com, where you can also find more show information, merchandise for surviving siblings like you, and more resources and support. They got your information because you're absolutely right. They can't tell a boyfriend or it has to be family. So yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know. I know that whoever gave them my number must have told them she lives in New York, but if her sister's in Massachusetts, she might be too. So I don't know. I know that they couldn't get into, either my sister or my dad's phone. So it was locked. I think they could see like messages on the screen, but they couldn't get into them. So yeah, I don't know how they found me.
Wild.
And so I said, you mean my mom doesn't know? And they asked for my mom's address so that they could go tell her in person. And they said, don't call her, let us tell her. Which I was sort of, even in the moment, was like, really? Is that really better? That she's going to have police show up at her house and tell her that her daughter's dead than hear it from me? And I remember thinking, I hope whatever my mom is doing right now is like the happiest moment of her life. And I hope that whatever it is right now, I hope it's so good, because I just know that it's about to be so bad. And it was interesting, even during this entire phone call, there was a part of my brain that was like, wow, you're handling this so well. And I was laying on the sidewalk screaming, like lying next to
New York City, right?
In New York City, like, and I was like, you're handling this so well, because I think that I truly thought if I ever got a call like that, I would die. I would stop breathing. Like my heart would stop. I wouldn't even be able to give them my mom's address. I was so surprised in the moment I could even tell her tell them where she lived. And so, they said they were going to send an officer to my mom's house. And then I was like, okay, but like what do I do? Like I'm alone. I'm on the street. Like I need help. And it was not even occurring to me to like hang up the phone and call someone. It felt like I needed to stay on with the police, but I was like, I can't hail a cab. I can't get on the subway. Like, what do I do? And I saw that there was a police station like half a block from where I was, and I was about to just get up and walk to the police station, because that was all I could think of. I was like, I'll just hand them my cell phone. They can talk officer to officer. They'll give me a ride home, or they'll figure out what to do. So once I was about to do that, these two girls walked up to me. They were like, are you okay? And
so on your way to go to this police station, these two girls.
Yeah, I had kind of just stood up, and they came up to me like, are you okay? And I just said, my family's dead. I just found out my family's dead. And I think I handed one of them the phone. And so one of them lived across the street. I guess she had heard me crying from her apartment. So she came down at the same time this other girl. They didn't know each other. This other girl had also heard like somebody is really in distress out here. So I think they were trying to find where I was, but I was again like lying down, so they couldn't see me. So when they found me, she was like, come up to my apartment, like let me call somebody for you. So you told her to call my boyfriend at the time, and I remember she brought me into her apartment. I just had like tunnel vision. I couldn't even see. I didn't even, know where I was, know what was happening. And so I sat at the apartment and I waited for my boyfriend to get there. And then we went back to Brooklyn and, are still going to Massachusetts, just under very, very different circumstances now. And I think on the way there, I don't know if I called the police back to see if they'd gotten to my mom's yet, but I remember then my mom got on the phone with me and she was just screaming, just, same as I was, just screaming like, oh my God, Brittany. And my sister had a very serious boyfriend that she lived with. So I think my mom had also called him. So we went and got him and picked him up and then drove to Massachusetts. And I just remember the whole drive, we're just crying. We're silent except for crying. Like nobody was saying anything.
What do you say? What do you say, right? Yeah. What do you say? So it's your boyfriend and her boyfriend, and you guys are going, and your boyfriend's driving as you guys go to Massachusetts. Oh, thank God for him.
Yeah. No, I mean, he really, we're not together. We haven't been together in a long time, but we were together for at least probably 2 or 3 years after they died. And he was so there for me. Like I will always be thankful to him. He was there for me with everything that happened with the aftermath, and he was, physically there, emotionally there, like everything. We ended on great terms, and I will always be so thankful to him for everything that he did.
That's amazing, Chelsea. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that in a little bit because
Mhm.
I get questions all the time from people, my partner's not understanding me or my partner's not helping me. So I definitely want to dig into that as
Yeah.
we kind of talk about what happened post. So you guys are on this like 5-hour car ride or long car ride, and what happens next? Do you go to your mom's house? Like what's the plan? This is always the time that's kind of just a fog and really difficult because you can't even believe what's happened.
Yeah. I mean, like my memory of the car ride it was probably about 3 hours. I remember it like it was 5 minutes because it was just, just sitting there
Yeah.
just in shock, just total shock. Like it real, I mean, it's crazy how much you really can't process and really cannot believe what's happening. And, and so, yeah, so we get to my mom's house and late, and her best friend was over at that point. And I think my mom and I just held each other and cried for so long. And then my mom asked me if I had called Emma, and Emma was my sister's best friend from like childhood. And, we had known her since we were 11 years old. She's at my house every weekend. Really, really close friend of my sister's. And she's like, I think you should call Emma. I was like, I don't want to call anybody. I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want this to be real. If I start calling people, I start telling them it's real. I don't want to. And she's like and it's funny because everybody handles grief so differently. My mom was like, we need to call everybody. And I was like, I don't want to call anybody. So,
but I get both of your
yeah.
perspectives, right? And I'm sure you guys are like, well, I would be like Chelsea or I would be like her mom because it was, I go back to my son-in-law's experience as well. And it was just like, I didn't want to tell anybody, but I knew I needed to tell people. And you're right. You said that so well. If you tell people, it starts to become real. Because I remember when it became real for me, I finally posted on Facebook. And I was like, look, my brother's not going to make it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I look back on that now and I'm like, why did I wait like 2 days to post that? Like he was never making it. Like, why did I, you know what I mean? But it's because of our brains all process it differently. Some people want to just go ahead and say it. And like, maybe that's their way of processing. Some of us hold on to it somewhere in the middle, maybe. It's interesting. It really is.
Yeah, it is. It's so crazy how we all can have such different grief journeys, such different responses to grief. I think that's something my mom and I have struggled in our relationship, is that we've tended to have very different responses to grief, the whole time. And, things that are really healing for her are really traumatizing for me, and things that I want to do don't feel right to her. And so when it comes to, celebrating anniversaries and, birthdays and stuff, it's been tough. We've had to work really hard to get to a place where we, both of us can feel like our needs are being met, which is difficult. And it's also, I've lost, my father, my sister. They're the people that I really went to when I needed something. They're always the people that I went to when something was wrong. They're gone. And now my mom is also in this profound state of grief. Like she can't just be there to support me. I can't just be there to support her. So it's very difficult. And I think, different family dynamics and everything that comes up can make things really, really hard.
So well said. And yes, a lot of us can relate, and definitely no two people in my family grieve the same. So I get you. I get you. And I know you guys do as well. And so we'll get into that in just a little bit too, because I'm interested to hear the different things that work for you and different things that have worked for your mom, because I think that'll be really helpful too. So did you call Emma? Did you call her friend, or what was your next move?
I did call her, and I was crying so hard she could not understand what I was saying. And like 3 times she was like, what? And she was like, Chelsea, I'm so sorry. I don't know what you're saying at all. And so I handed the phone to my mom's friend who told her. And then, she gave the phone back to me, and I could tell like she was trying so hard not to like react for me. She was like, it's okay. It's okay. It's going to be okay. And I was like, it's not. No, it's not going to be okay. And of course I don't fault her for saying that at all. Like there's no right thing to say, when something like that happens. There's plenty of wrong things to say, as I'm sure we've all heard them, but there really isn't, a right thing to say. And so then and actually the part that I did forget was when I was at that girl's apartment waiting for my boyfriend to get there, she asked me, do you know what happened? And I said, well, no, I just know that they died on my dad's motorcycle, which, yes, motorcycles are dangerous. Like, I'm not going to argue with anybody on that. If you get hit on a motorcycle, you have very little protection. But my father was so safe. Like, he had been riding motorcycles since he was 16 years old. He was so safe. Like, he, especially with my sister on his bike, like, they maybe took like one, drive on the motorcycle a year, like in like a country road. We live in like the suburbs, the woods, like, it felt like a very low risk activity.
Right.
And it's, and I was like, it's really hard for me to believe that my dad would have just done something, to cause this. And so she's like, well, do you want to call the police back and try and get more information? And I don't know that I really did, because it's also like they're dead. Like, at this point, I'm not worried about the story. Like, there's so much else.
In that moment in time, yes, you're not really, it's like you're trying to get your mind and your heart and soul around the fact that they're gone. Yeah. I feel like that comes later, right? When you start to question more. But did you call them? Did you take her advice? What was?
Yeah. So I called them back and I said, like, what happened? And they said, we don't know what happened, which wasn't true. They absolutely knew what happened, but they weren't going to tell me in that moment. They said, we don't know what happened, but we know that somebody came from the other lane and hit them head on. And that's when I went, well, were they drunk? Were they texting? Like, what happened? And they said, we don't know. And that's when I started to go like, oh God, like somebody did this. And that felt worse. I'm not trying to, like, grief is grief, loss is loss. I'm not trying to say one is worse than the other, but that was the first time I realized, like, oh, somebody caused this. Like, this wasn't.
No, it brings up a different emotion, Chelsea. It's very valid. It brings up a different emotion because if, again, you're right. There's no point in us comparing, right? But it brings a different narrative and it brings a different complexity to your grief and to your loss. Because now, it would have been one thing if it was a rainy day and maybe, or if the roads were wet and maybe they veered off, it was a complete accident. That's still horrific and we're not comparing. But, your question's going to be like more existential, like why God, or why universe, or why, when there's someone at fault, you tend to shift a little bit in your grief journey. And so again, different questions for different people, different anger, is allotted into different people or directed in different ways. So no, this is very valid. And I'm glad we're talking about this aspect of your story because it's very important. So knowing that there was a party responsible, it does change things. It really does.
Yeah. Oh yeah. As I'm sure that it does. And even when I heard that, I was like, I hope it was somebody that had a seizure. I hope it was a heart attack. I hope it was a medical emergency. I hope that it can't be helped. I just knew, like, this will be worse. Like, this will feel so horrible. So the next day, at that point, like, people were starting to come to my house. I think my mom and I were, I was kind of just calling people in shock and being like, my sister, my dad are dead. And then be like, I have to go. I have to call somebody else. And my mom was calling, we don't have a lot of family. Like, that's also the other thing that sucks is, we didn't have a lot of family to begin with. And so, right. And then we've lost a lot of family since. So, but at this point, like, people were starting to come, my dad had a serious girlfriend, her and her daughter, like our other friends, people from New York are getting the call and making their way down. So that's how it felt for the next like 5 days or so, that my mom's house was just full of people. We had air mattresses in the dining room and a lot of people around. So at some point, people are starting to come the next day. We got a phone call from the victim advocate at the district attorney's office. So that's the person that just kind of works with the victims to kind of talk them through, a court case, if there's going to be a court case.
Right.
So that's when we found out that that there was a man and his girlfriend were driving an SUV, and they were completely nodded out, overdosing on heroin while they were driving down the road. And they had both been driving. They had both been switching off. Like, one would nod out and then the other would drive, and then they would nod out. So they were switching back and forth. And then, this man was driving. and he was completely passed out, and the witnesses saw that he had his head kind of slumped against the driver's side window while he was driving, and he just drove right into my dad and my sister, right to the motorcycle, and hit them head on. And it looked like from the witnesses and stuff that my dad had tried to swerve out of the way, and they still hit him. And that was, again, even worse than I had imagined.
And because now you're getting these answers and they're not the ones that you wanted. Definitely not. So what happens next? Some people listening do understand what it's like to work with the victim's advocate. Some people are unfortunately new to it. I think, overall it's very helpful to have that. But you've just gotten some really big news, like news that once you are like, okay, yes, like I've lost my sister, my dad, like you said earlier very well, like I hope it was really truly an accident. I hope it was really truly, this is awful, what you've uncovered. And I can only imagine that like anger was coming up in you. Like what emotions were you feeling as you were having that conversation with your victim's advocate? Like I can't imagine, but I can also because I remember, hearing some crazy things in a totally different way. So what was kind of going through your mind and your body? Because I can feel like anger come up in me. So I think a lot of us can connect with that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a level of anger I never even knew I could feel. It was a level of hatred I never knew that I could feel. I mean, I remember when she told, I guess somebody spoke to her and then they told everyone, and I was sitting outside on my mom's deck on her table, and I just slammed the table with my fist and just knocked everything off. I was so angry, and I stayed angry. I really stayed angry. And so the person that did this, of course, was charged with vehicular homicide. He was, immediately, put in jail while he was awaiting sentencing and, a trial. But we went to court. He ended up pleading guilty, which he did not want to do. So he showed really very little remorse for what he did. Even at the scene, people, because of course people saw the accident, they stopped. I think people realized pretty quickly that my father and my sister had been killed instantly. And somebody had turned to him at the time. And I think it was very apparent when he got out of the car that he was on drugs. Right. He actually tried to make his girlfriend say that she was the one that was driving the car. And
what a wonderful gentleman, right?
Yeah.
Like oh my God. Oh
yeah. And she went along with it for a little while and
get out of town. Are you serious?
Yeah. No,
she went along with it. But there's so many witnesses, like you were saying, that it was just not gonna fly. Yeah.
Yeah. People very quickly were like, no, it was absolutely not her. And and somebody said to him, I think when they were waiting for the police to get there, like, do you realize you just killed 2 people? And he looked down at the motorcycle on the ground and he lit a cigarette and he said, no, that wasn't me. The curb woke me up. And and then and then he really didn't want to plead guilty. His public defender was like, you don't really have a choice. Like, there's really no defense here. I think he was hoping he could create some kind of confusion by trying to get his girlfriend to take the rap, that they wouldn't know. But I mean, this was such an open and shut, like, so many witnesses, they saw you do it. You're clearly on drugs. You have drugs in the car. There's drugs in your system. Like, there's no defense here. And so even when we
how am I going to defend you? Basically, I'm sure his attorney was like, how do I even defend you? Like, this is like, just you gotta do it, man. Like, you gotta take accountability. It's crazy.
Yeah, and he did not want to. He tried to fire his public defender and get a different one. And
you're hearing all this information through your victim's advocate, right? I just want to clarify this for people. How were you finding out about all of this?
No, sorry. So we met very quickly. We met with the assistant district attorney, who's the person that prosecutes the case. Yep. We went right away, and we really wanted to be involved. We wanted to know what was happening. So our victim advocate, to be honest, I kind of felt like her only real role was, I mean, she would kind of, tell us what was going on, but we were hearing it from the assistant district attorney. The reason I started thinking about this was when you were talking about anger is I was so visibly angry, and every single time I was in a courtroom with him, like I mean, I was shaking. I had my fist balled up. I wouldn't take my eyes off of him. And so everybody really thought that I was going to attack him. And
you probably felt like you were inside too.
I mean, they didn't really give me a chance to, but it kind of felt like after a while I would joke that the victim advocate's only role was just to remind me not to attack him in the courtroom. Like she would just say that every time we went in. Just so you know, if you attack him, they will press charges and he won't be allowed to go to any other court proceeding. So that was kind of all I felt like she was really doing. And they really, I mean, they brought him in through a special door. Like this was a relatively small town. This was a pretty big deal when it happened. It was like very front page of the paper, which was another, level of trauma to deal with, because I'm not somebody that really wanted to be on the front page of the paper. I didn't really want to be interviewed, but it felt like I didn't have a choice. And that was a tough thing too. Like at the sentencing, they put a picture of me crying on the front page of the paper. Like that's, if you Google me 10 years later, you're going to see a picture of me crying in a courtroom. You're going to see quotes like, from my victim impact statement. And that was tough. That was tough to deal with as well.
I think a lot of people who have dealt with homicide, whether it's like my homicide or vehicular homicide, which is what you are dealing with, and I thank you for answering that already, because I was going to say what we're dealing with here, because obviously it was a vehicular some people might say manslaughter. No, it was homicide what happened here. But I think you're talking about so many things that a lot of people listening will be curious to learn more about or may connect with, unfortunately, personally. And one thing that we talk about a lot on here, and one is the victim's advocate. So thanks for sharing about that. And I do think people have varied experiences.
Absolutely.
But I do think you just gave a great piece there. If you can get involved with the DA or assistant DA, like you're really going to the source there. And so if you're someone like you and your mom, like if you guys want the answers, that's where you're going to get the answers. So I wanted to point that out. But tell us a little bit about giving your victim's impact statement, because we're talking about that on this season with anyone who's gone through a loss that's a homicide. And I think I get this is like the number one question I get from people going through a homicide type case. Should I do it or should I not do it? Tell us a little bit about that, Chelsea. Are you glad that you did it? What was that experience like for you? And what advice can you give to people? I'd love for you to share that part of your story if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So to clarify, I might have mentioned he did plead guilty. So we didn't have to go through a trial. He did eventually plead guilty. And we had what's called an agreed upon plea. So it means that the prosecution and the defense both agree on a sentence, which was 15 to 20 years. We were not happy with that sentence. We felt like, it. Yeah. We felt like he had a very long, criminal history before this. Like the chances of him doing this again are high, and that might sound like a long sentence, but he could be out in 5 years. That's not
right. That's not anybody who's new to this process. Like you got to understand 15 to 20 years is like 5 years. It's not, it depends on your state. It depends on your jurisdiction. It depends on your city. It depends on where, disclaimer, we're not attorneys here, but we have experience with this. And when somebody gets sentenced for that amount of time, they're not actually serving that amount of time. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In Massachusetts, I forget now exactly what it was. I think he could get like a month off a year for good behavior, which could mean he could get out tomorrow. We know that he hasn't had good behavior in jail. Which one thing I would encourage people to do, at least in Massachusetts, I don't know how it works in other states. Massachusetts, I will say, does have a lot of victim programs. They have a victim of violent crime fund, so we didn't have to pay for anything. We didn't have to pay for the funerals, the burials, anything.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Which was really nice. And you are allowed to get updates on how the person is doing in prison. So we know that he's been caught multiple times, like with people mailing him heroin and stuff in prison. So,
and you are, this is everywhere. You are allowed to know when they're due for, they're up for parole and all of that. So it does translate. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. But we didn't want 15 to 20 years. And I think, a lot of people have said to me like, oh, you're so lucky. Which of course nobody feels lucky in that. I do, when I speak to somebody like you where there was no prosecution and the person was completely let off, like I do feel fortunate that at least it wasn't that situation, because I can't even imagine what it would feel like to have a family member be murdered and then the person just walks and they don't even get prosecuted. And
it's horrific. But, you know, the thing about it, Chelsea, is that, you know, regardless, and this is something I talk about quite a lot this season, and I've talked about it on other shows now that I'm doing other shows about this, you know, nothing's going to bring my brother back, right? I think that's when I got to the place, and it doesn't make it okay, and doesn't mean it's okay, and doesn't mean it's okay what this guy did, but nothing's going to bring him back. Is it scary that this guy, I know who he is, I know the things he's done, and all of this happened the way that it did? Yes. But the reality is that nothing's going to bring my brother back. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that I don't wish things that went differently. I do. Mm-hmm. But you have every right to feel, and this is for all of you guys, you have every right to feel like, I can't believe he only got 15 years, or I can't, you know what I'm saying? Like, but I do think it is quite healthy to also be like, gosh, at least we got something, you know, at least we got something. But I still think we need to tell these stories because it's still not enough. It's still not enough. It needs to end all over, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are you glad that you made your statement though? Tell us a little bit about that process, because yes, thanks for clarifying. Yes, I know you guys didn't go to trial because you agreed, but do you feel like it was still important? I think this is a great message. Like, do you feel like it was still important? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So for me, absolutely. Yes, it was. You know, in terms of like, if other people should do it, I can't tell anybody, you know, if it's something that feels like it's too hard, it's too traumatizing, it's too whatever, like I support anybody doing what they need to do in their own grief journey. I agree. For me, it was really important because I felt like I was really the person that lost two people. You know, I lost my father and I lost my sister. And, you know, not saying my mom did lose two people, but her and my dad had not been together for a very long time. So it was a very different loss for her. And I felt like it was really important, especially for my dad. I felt like, you know, my sister had a ton of support, as she should. And there's, you know, a difference, you know, when you're 29 versus when you're older. But it felt like I really needed to be the one to stand up for my dad too, and make sure that he didn't also get lost in this. Because as much as like it made sense that there was an emphasis on my sister, as there should be, as my dad would want there to be an emphasis on my sister, I wanted to make sure that it was also spoken for that he died too, and that
he was killed too. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I really wanted to make it clear as much as I could, the magnitude of two losses. So for me, it was important not to speak to the person that did this. I truly don't think he cared. I don't think that he felt anything. He was very stoic. He never really showed any emotion throughout this whole process. It wasn't to speak to him, you know, it was to speak to every other person in the courtroom. It was to make him hear the things that I wanted to say about him in front of everybody else. Whether it made an impact on him, I don't know, and I don't care, and that wasn't the point of it. It was like, this is my opportunity to speak for what this has been like for me. And so I'm very glad that I did it. It never really crossed my mind not to. I also felt like it's the least that I get. Like, this is such a horrible process, and I don't really have a lot of rights in it. I'm not going to get my way in any part of this, but at least I can speak. At least I can have a voice and say, like, this is what happened to me. And because of this person's selfish, reckless actions, because he chose to operate a vehicle when he was essentially unconscious, like, I lost my father and my sister, and I need to be able to speak that and let people feel the magnitude of that.
Yeah. Beautifully said, Chelsea. I think it's really interesting, your perspective, though, and kind of your objective as well, because I think some people want to do the victim's advocate statement because I think a lot of the same things that you shared, right? But sometimes people do want to speak directly to the person, right? And so I think that's okay too. Like, that's totally okay. But I connect a lot with what you're saying too. Sometimes, like, if you feel like you want to do it, do it. Like, that's kind of what I tell people, because I think you're always going to regret the things that you didn't do. You're not going to regret the things that you did. I mean, you might, but like, that's okay. Like, oops, or like, it was super hard or whatever. But something like this, I think you're going to have more regrets if you don't do it versus doing it. And it doesn't mean that doing it is right for you, but if you feel like this is something you want to do, you could have someone else read the statement. You can still write it. So there's different options, which we've talked about on this season. So I was really curious to hear kind of your perspective and why you did it, why you shared. And I love that because I think it is important. Like, you really are like the connection point of your father and your sister. And so you giving that statement and you speaking out, like, you're the epicenter for them, right? So if you didn't make that statement, you know, we'll never have to ask that question. We'll never have to ask that question and wonder.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that part with us. I think that's interesting. I think everyone needs to do it for whatever reason they feel. And again, if you have that nagging feeling or gnawing feeling, I always tell people, do it. There's something telling you, like, and that's with anything in life. So tell us a little bit about how life was after you lost your sister and your father and how you've come 10 years. I know it's a big question, but kind of tell us a little bit about that, because it sounds like you had a really supportive partner. Did you guys have celebrations of life, funerals? What was it like kind of post the loss for them? Did you see their bodies? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah. All that. So I did see their bodies probably a couple of days after they died. And
which is another hard decision, right?
Yeah,
do I see them or do I not? That's a hard one. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that's another one. I'll never tell anybody what you should or shouldn't do there. I think I had to really prove it to myself that they were really gone. I think that if I didn't see it, I like would always like, I would always wonder, we're so good at like this magical thinking, like, and I was still there. I was like, maybe somebody stole their wallet and then stole my dad's motorcycle and they got on it and they're the ones that crashed and they're actually okay. Like, you really can convince your brain of a lot of things. I was like, I have to see them. And also I think, not to be like too graphic, but given the nature of how they died, right? That's a violent death, getting killed, coming off a motorcycle. And I think that I was really afraid that I was going to see like them very injured or very disfigured. And it did give me some peace to see that it wasn't like that. Like, it was sort of shocking. Like, I remember when I saw them and I was like, except for the fact that you're dead, you look fine. And that was weird. I'm like, how could you be dead when you look so fine? Of course, it's all internal injuries. It's all like blunt force trauma. But so for those two reasons, it was important for me to see them. But I only saw them the one time. I did not want to see them after that. We did not do like an open casket. I knew that my sister, my dad would definitely not want hundreds of people seeing them like that. I think they had opened it like one other time and I was like, please shut it. Like, it's enough now. And yeah, so we had a funeral. And I mean, it was fine. I think it was hard because I wasn't really in a place to advocate for what I wanted. I was still like in so much shock. And so looking back on it now, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. But I was trying to get through it. We had a memorial for my sister also in New York, maybe about a month later. And I mean, none of those things, really brought me any peace. It just felt like something you kind of have to do.
Right.
And yeah, and then I stayed in Massachusetts for probably like a month or two after they died. And so did my boyfriend. He actually quit his job and stayed in Massachusetts with me. I didn't go back to work for probably close to 3 months. Like, it really felt like doing anything was impossible. Like, I was like, how do I, like, I would be at the grocery store, a couple weeks later, and I wanted to like scream out, like, my father, my sister just died. Like, what the hell am I doing here? But eventually you sort of have to pick up the pieces and move forward with your life. Like, not because you want to, because you have to. Like, if I stop going to work, I'm going to run out of money. Like, if I stop going to the store, I'm not going to eat. So I eventually went back to work, which was tough because I could not care. I could not care. And my job was kind of stressful, and people would come to me with like issues and they complain about stuff. And I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care at all.
Well, it's because it's minutia. It doesn't matter. You just lost your sister and your father. Like, who cares if this is not right, or who cares if someone's upset about something? Like, you've just dealt with death.
Yeah.
Double time. So I understand, and I know a lot of you listening, if not all of you, understand that too, because it's like, and I love your grocery store reference too.
Yeah.
It's like, how dare you guys keep shopping for your milk and your eggs
Yeah.
and like whatever. Like, what are you doing? Like, the world just ended.
Yeah.
And it did for you.
Yeah.
It's very real.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. And you know, and I think also I had a lot of delayed sort of side effects of grief that I didn't expect, and I think
Like
they
what?
kind of hit me. So like I developed a lot of anxiety. I didn't realize too, and I think it's something that's not really talked about that much, but like I lost the two people that I was closest to. I lost the two people that like really loved me the most in the world, really understood me, really got me, like the people I went to when I had a problem. Like I was very close with my sister. I was such a daddy's girl. Like it was always, you know, if I had an issue, I was calling one of them to bail me out, you know, literally and figuratively. And so when you lose that, that's a really big source of love in your life that you don't have anymore. And that takes a toll on you after a while, I think. Like it was sort of a profound sadness, like beyond losing that, like sad for myself. Like I think I had lower self-esteem. I doubted myself more. I had anxiety. I felt unsure because I was like, I've lost my biggest support system. So trying to kind of, and I think a lot of things in my life changed. You know, my boyfriend and I broke up, I think about 2 or 3 years after they died. I don't think it was really related to, you know, my grief or anything with that. And again, I said he was a very supportive partner. I think we just grew apart and we just fell out of love, and we ended, you know, we were together for 6 years. We ended pretty amicably. And then I quit my job and I moved back to Massachusetts, and I've been in Massachusetts for the last 7 years. I thought I'd stay for like 6 months, and I've been here for 7 years. And so I really kind of rebuilt my life here. My friend Emma also moved from New York to Massachusetts with me, so I'm extremely close to her. She lives down the street from me. And, you know, you learn to be happy and you learn to find meaning again. But I'm a very different person, you know, than I was in 2014. I miss the person I was when I didn't understand profound grief and loss, and I didn't see the ripple effect of everything that happens after. But
very well said, Chelsea. Yeah, the ripple effect, totally. And you are a different person, and that might attribute to why, you know, your relationship evolved, and you know. But I am curious to ask you about that piece though, because you did mention earlier in the episode, and I wanted to ask you about this, that he was emotionally, mentally, physically checked in. So can you share a little bit about what he did right as a partner? Because this is another question that comes up so much, you know, like how do I get my husband, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my wife, whatever, they don't understand what's going on. But I think it's interesting because I think people kind of check out because they don't, or they kind of lean in because they don't. And it sounds like your boyfriend leaned in because he didn't. So what are some things that he did that were comforting for you? So 10 years later, you can reflect back and be like, look, we just grew apart. We didn't work out, but like he was great. He was really there for me. I'd be curious to hear that.
Yeah, I think that he just had my back in every possible way, and it was little things and it was big things, and he showed up. I mean, he was there. He came, picked me up, brought me to Massachusetts, didn't leave for like a month, quit his job. He came to every single, you know, court case that, or, you know, court appearance that we had, and he advocated for me in little ways. I remember, this is such a small thing, but we were at the funeral home and we were picking out caskets. And the funeral director was like, you know, they're caskets, they go on the ground. You just pick the cheapest ones. Like, don't go crazy. And there was this model that was Chelsea caskets, and that was the name of it. And I was like, well, you know, I want the Chelsea caskets. And I kind of said it, and nobody really paid attention. They're kind of like, yeah, okay, do that cheapest model. And my boyfriend was like, no, she wants the Chelsea caskets. Like, did you hear her? She wants the Chelsea caskets. And I think what meant the most to me is, you know, grief can make you really crazy. It can make you do things where you're like, oh my God, who was that? And
Amen, sister. Yeah.
And you get triggered in these weird ways where you're just like, oh my God. And he was so supportive of me, even when I was being a crazy person. And he had my back fully. I remember I had gone a couple months after they died. I had gone to a party with him and some of his friends, and they were playing Risk, which was a game that I grew up playing with my sister and my dad. I'm good at it. My dad taught me when I was little. Like, we played it all the time, and I started playing, and I started winning. And then everybody did what you do when you're playing Risk. You gang up on the winner, and you try and gang up and take them out. And I got so triggered and probably been drinking too much, and I started snapping at everyone and be like, you're really not going to let me win? Like, my dad and my sister are dead. You're not going to let me win? Like, that's my dad who's dead taught me to play this game. And I was of making people visibly uncomfortable. I was being like a little insane. That's a little insane to throw at people at a party. And he just was like, that's what she's going through. Like, you know, like totally like was not embarrassed, didn't tell me I shouldn't have done it. He's like, hey, that's what she's going through. She's in a really bad place. Like, you probably should have let her win. I don't know what to tell you, you know? And I think it was like the little things that he advocated for me with. And then just I told him I was going to quit my job without having another job lined up. And he was like, okay, if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. You know, really just very there for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Chelsea. I think that's so helpful because you've said quite a few things that I've seen in good partners, right? Like partners that, and it doesn't, I'm going to clarify, it doesn't mean that you have a bad partner. They just might not know how to lean in, right? And so, because different personalities, they all grieve different, they all process things different. So, you know, that's what happens sometimes when we go through a significant loss. We really kind of see maybe how that person deals with things, and it doesn't mean that they can't. And you said a lot of really interesting things. One, he was just there. And that's what I always tell people when they're like, how can I be there for someone? I'm like, I just physically needed someone to be next to me. Because the person, I was dating a guy at the time that I lost my brother, super nice guy, you know, did not end poorly or anything like that, but it was quite a new relationship. And he was so busy with his career and he just couldn't be there. And the person who was there for me was someone that I had dated in the past, but we had actually been friends for like a decade. And he was just physically there. He was physically there. So much so that he actually launched my first podcast with me. So I owe him a lot. Yeah. But those are the kinds of things he did well for me too, Chelsea. Like, he was just there. And when I said, hey, I got to leave my job, like, which everyone else was like, are you lost your mind? Like, you have this big corporate career. Like, I was 30 years old. And I was like, I just got to, he's like, do it. He's like, you got to stay at my place. You can stay at my place. Like, you want me to move in, help you with the mortgage? Like, and that none of that happened, thank God. But just feeling like you have a safety net, feeling like someone's physically present, feeling like someone has your back, like you said. Like, I mean, I don't even know who I was in 2017. Like, I don't even know who I was. Yeah. And there's things that I probably don't remember, things that I look back on, like you said, maybe drinking too much or lashing out at people. And it was really the people that just, you know, it's not that they put up with my bad behavior, but they were just like, look, she's going through something. And, you know, they weren't afraid to be honest with me, but they were there for me too. And I think there's a balance, and it sounds like he really nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what can happen a lot with your partners or people close to you is like, they want to make it better and they want to solve it and they can't solve it. And so they'll do things like give you advice or try and tell you what to do or tell you shouldn't do certain things. And it is coming from a place of like wanting to solve the problem, but it's a problem that can't be solved. So just, I think just being there is really all you can do, is just support the person and be there.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yep. And that's why boyfriend did such a great job. My friend did such a great job. Like, it was exactly what the doctor ordered. No, you know, we just kind of need people there. And you're right. They want to give you advice. And, you know, you don't really know. You haven't been through my situation. You haven't been in my shoes. And so just being there and being supportive, I think, is so huge. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I'm curious to ask too, before we start to kind of close out, Chelsea, you did mention earlier that you and your mom have grieved so differently. And you gave us the example of her wanting to call and, you know, you wanting to kind of be like, no, you know, because it makes it real, which a lot of us can relate to. Tell us a little bit about how you guys have grieved differently and where you are now 10 years into this. Because I know me personally, I'm now at a place where I'm like, all right, I might not agree with things that certain family members do, and I know they feel the same way about me, but I'm okay with it as long as it's a healthy way of processing grief. So I'm curious to see where you are in your journey, because you're 10 years into this and your mom and you have grieved so differently.
Yeah. You know, I mean, to be totally candid, my mom and I have always struggled a little bit in our relationship, and there was always sort of this natural divide where like it was me and my dad and my sister and my mom, and we had to learn outside of grieving, we had to learn how to have a relationship that was just the two of us, that didn't have a buffer. It was always, I'd fight with my mom, I'd go to my sister, I'd tell her, she'd call my mom, she'd mediate it. You know, I'd complain to my dad, he'd make me feel better. When it was just the two of us, it was like, wow, we've never had a relationship, just the two of us. You know, I mean, my mom, you know, one perfect example is on the year anniversary they died. My mom wanted to go to the spot that they died, like where they physically died at the actual time that they died. And I went, and I'm standing there and I'm like, this is horrible. This is torture. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves? This is not making me feel better at all. And a lot of the stuff that I want to do on the anniversaries and birthdays is just like simply get through the day. I just want to maybe go out to eat or watch a movie. I just want to get through it. And I think my mom rituals are very important to her. You know, she has a lot of beliefs in terms of spirituality and stuff that it just really, like, it feels like she needs to honor them in like every step of the way. And I think we honor them differently, and different things, you know, feel right to us. You know, even, you know, my mom wants to talk about my sister to anybody, you know, who will listen. And I'm a little bit more careful about who I talk to people about with, you know, it's hard. I feel like this is a huge trauma that I've been through, and I don't owe my story to everybody. I don't have, like, my mom will be at a restaurant and be like, this food is delicious. My daughter would have loved this food, but she's not here anymore. And I'm like, okay, like, I don't feel the need to do that. I don't want to, like, you know, and we've had to work, like, when they first died, I was like, I'll never fight with my mom ever again. You know, she's all I have. And of course we fought hundreds of times over the last 10 years. There was a period where we didn't speak to each other, and we've really, really had to work hard. We've gone to therapy together. We've had to really work hard to make our relationship strong. And I will say we're in a very good place right now, and we've been in a good place for a while, but I think we definitely had some growing pains in getting there and figuring out how to, you know, plan anniversaries and birthdays where we both, you know, got what we wanted out of them. And it's also hard too, because, you know, even when I'm spending time with my mom, like, I still 10 years later, I'm like, God, this would be so much more fun if my sister was here. Like, yeah. We do stuff together, and it's like we both feel that empty chair so much that it's hard, you know. It's a very, very heavy loss. It's very felt in really every aspect of my life.
Yeah. I think it's great though. I think it's great that you and your mom have done therapy and have worked through stuff. And, you know, I think if you could look back and, you know, at that time and then look forward, you know, I think that person would be super proud of where you are today. Okay. I think it's really tough. It's really tough when you lose a family member or anyone in your life that's like a glue that keeps other relationships together for you, which is really a big part of your story, Chelsea. Yeah. And, you know, it's difficult. And I think grieving in different ways, like for me, I wanted everyone to grieve like me. Yeah. You know, I was like, you got to be angry and pissed off and want justice and all of this. And, you know, there's still sometimes where it creeps up, and I do feel that way. And I do not always love the way that some of my other family members grieve. But 7 years into this, I feel I'm really aligned with your story and where you are. It's like, look, this is what they need to do. This is what I need to do. And I can understand why that would have been super intense. On the 1 year anniversary, you're going to the scene where it happened. That's intense, you know, but I think it's great that you accept your mom and like what she needs to do. And it sounds like she does prompting questions, which some people do. It's typical in grief that I've learned. I'm no therapist, but again, I've learned so much doing this for 2 years now. And it's interesting that people will do prompting questions. And I'm a little bit, I think I'm kind of in the middle of you and your mom. Like, I really do enjoy talking about my brother, but I've shared my story with the world. So you know, but I didn't do it because I felt like I owed his story or my story to the world. I wanted his story to be told. And I'm not just going to tell anyone the nitty-gritty details. They're like, oh, what happened? I get to choose what I share. And I feel like you and I do have that in common, and a lot of you guys as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's another thing too that's very different with my mom is I am so angry. And, you know, even when we were even the way that we reacted, to the person that did this, like my mom would just cry, like it would just make her so sad. And I was like, I mean, I just want to get up and I just want to attack him. And I think that I always have sort of, processed a lot of my negative feelings through anger. And I think that can be really challenging. It can be hard to be around somebody that's angry if you don't also feel the same way, if you're not similarly angry. And I think
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
So well said, Chelsea. I think that's really, if I'm like, you're making me think now. I'm like, I think I was very difficult for my family to be around. Mm-hmm. I think I was very difficult because I was so flippin' angry, like just so angry. And I can tap back into that like that if I need to, And people are like, how did you move through anger? How did you move through that? And I'm like, it doesn't mean it's still not there sometimes, it's definitely there. It's just not something that I sit with every day. Do you feel kind of the same way? I always love talking to people who had they got kind of stuck in the anger stage or phase, right? Do you feel that way too? Or where are you with your anger?
Yeah. I mean, I work to control my anger, but I think that anger is just another emotion like anybody else, any other emotion. And, I can feel sad. I can feel angry. I can feel, happy. And I think what I had to learn was to not lash out at people, because I definitely would lash out at people with my anger. Yeah. And it felt very acceptable because I was like, it's almost like when a little kid throws a temper tantrum. Like I have so many big feelings, like I need to lash out at you about them. And I was like, I don't want to hurt the people that are closest to me. I don't want to hurt the people that are there for me. But I don't think that people should, anger, all emotions are valid. It's what we do with them that counts. And I think, it's okay to be angry. You just can't, take it to an extreme. You can't do anything that's really damaging with it. But I don't think people should be afraid to be angry if that's the way you're feeling. Just process it in a good way.
I love that. Yes, because I think I was definitely afraid to be angry too. Mm-hmm. So like I connect. And so I think that just kind of, it's almost like a ball rolling down a hill then. So like if you're afraid to do it, it's just going to keep going and going. And, it keeps going and you're like, and it's just picking up stuff on the way down. And then you're going to smack into something, right? And that's the lashing out part. And that definitely happened for me. So I connect with that. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's just another emotion, but it's a very uncomfortable one, which is why I think sometimes we try to shove it down and then we lash out.
Yeah.
Chelsea, I just thank you so much for sharing Brittney and your dad with us today and your story. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to share about Brittney and your dad and this, again, horrible loss as you move into year 10 that you want to share with all of us, or anything that you want to reflect back on over the past 10 years and share with us?
Oh, gosh. I mean, it's hard because I could really, if I start talking about my sister right now, there's such wonderful, incredible people. It's hard to capture that in a short amount of time. It's hard to capture that in a long amount of time. How wonderful that they were. My dad was the funniest, smartest person I've ever met. Like he dropped everything to take care of us. He used to always say that, his gift to the world was his 2 daughters. And, he loved us so much, my sister and I. It's, as hard as it is and how much, there's no amount of time that's enough, and how devastated I am. Like, I'm so thankful that I had her for 27 years. I'm so thankful that I had my dad for 27 years. And the only thing that I would share now that I'm 10 years out from my grief journey, one thing that has really helped me a lot is connecting with other people that have experienced loss. And so now I volunteer with children that have lost a loved one, either, usually a parent or a sibling. And I feel like that's been really healing for me, is to, have, once you've had some time and had some experience, for me, that's been so important, was be able to give back in the same way that you are, to be able to like connect with people and give back on the experience that you have. And I remember what it was like, when I went to my first grief support group and I was like a month in and I didn't even know how I was like functioning, and to hear from people that were 10 years in was so important. So I'm trying to do that now as well.
Chelsea, I love that. Yes. Thanks so much for doing that. And yeah, it is inspiring, right? Because you're like, okay, if Chelsea made it to 10 years, maybe I can make it too.
Uh-huh.
Like, it gives you hope, right? And so that's why something clicked with me at 5 years. I was like, I don't know what it is, but, and I feel like these milestones, because we're human and we set these like 5, 10, 15,
Yes.
milestones, even though you might find 1 year is more significant than one of those milestone years. So it's interesting. Well, thank you so much for giving back to the community. Thanks for coming on here again and sharing your amazing sister and your father. It's just, again, there's a lot of people that message me about motorcycle accidents. And so, again, really excited to share your story because a lot of people are going to connect with you. Where can people, I didn't know you were giving back. This is so cool. So where can people connect with you? Are you on, what are your social handles that you're comfortable with people knowing?
Yeah, I mean, my Instagram is Chelsea Morgan 808. And my Facebook, I think it's like Chelsea McGrath. I'm definitely not the most interesting follow. I'm not very social media active, but if anybody wants to send me a message, or if you have questions or you just want to connect in that way, I'm very open to that.
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your sister and your father with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.